The photograph slipped out from under a stack of laminated wound care charts. I was reorganizing in the supply closet, drifted sideways, and landed face up on the tile before I could catch it, and I just stood there holding a clipboard, staring down at my own 23-year-old face grinning back up at me from the floor. I almost swept it into the recycling with the outdated forms. That's the part that still gets me when I tell this story. How close I came to losing it a second time without ever knowing what it would end up costing me or giving me back. I picked it up instead, sat down right there on an overturned supply bin because my knees suddenly didn't feel like holding me, and looked at it properly. It was taken outside the simulation lab at Ashgrove University Teaching Hospital, the old one, before they tore down that whole east wing and put up the glass atrium everybody complains costs too much to heat. I'm in the foreground, hair in a messy bun, laughing at something off camera. My student ID flipped backward on its lanyard the way it always was because I never remembered to check. And behind me, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and the kind of half-smile a person only gives when they think no one's watching them watch someone else, was Marcus Webb, third-year medical student. Tall in that gangly, not quite grown into it way 24-year-olds sometimes still are. He used to bring me coffee during finals week without ever once making it a thing. Just set it down on the counter of the nurse's station and kept walking like it was nothing, like it hadn't taken him 20 minutes out of his own study block to do it. We were nothing official. That's the honest truth, and it still needles me a little to admit it out loud. We were two exhausted 20-somethings trading terrible cafeteria coffee and worse jokes in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt drip coffee, falling for each other in the particular, compressed way you do when your whole world is 12-hour rotations and you've got maybe 40 minutes a week where your paths happen to cross. Then my clinical placement ended. His did too, a few months later, different hospital, different state, and somewhere in the scramble of graduation and boards and moving twice in 1 year, we lost each other the ordinary way people do. Not with a fight, not with a scene, just silence that got longer until it became permanent without either of us deciding it should. I sat on that supply bin for probably 10 minutes longer than I should have, my supervisor probably wondering where I'd wandered off to, running my thumb along the creased corner of the picture. I thought about all the versions of that year I'd told myself since. That it was nothing, that I'd imagined the weight of it. That I was young and everything feels enormous when you're that tired and that scared of failing out. I didn't imagine it. Looking at his face in that photograph, unguarded in a way he probably didn't know I could see, I knew I hadn't imagined a single bit of it. I put the photo in my scrub pocket instead of the recycling bin, finished my shift like a normal human being, and told myself that was the end of it. A nice little ambush of nostalgia, nothing more. I had a full patient load. A home life, an actual grown-up existence 11 years deep that didn't have room in it for a college crush I'd built up in my memory into something it probably never really was. Except I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in some dramatic, can't eat, can't sleep way. I'm 34 years old, I have bills and a dog and a mortgage. I don't do that anymore. But in the quieter way where a person just keeps drifting back into your thoughts at red lights and during the boring stretch of a night shift when the floor finally goes quiet. 2 weeks later, our hospital hosted a regional conference on trauma care coordination. I wasn't even supposed to attend that session. I was covering for a colleague whose kid had a fever, standing at the back of a conference room with a badge that said my name in 8-point font, half listening to a panel discuss triage protocols, when a man 2 rows ahead turned to say something to his neighbor, and I saw his profile and my stomach just dropped straight through the floor. I told myself it wasn't him. Statistically, in a room of maybe 200 medical professionals, the odds were not exactly in favor of coincidence, and yet, it was him. I didn't say anything during the session. I sat there for the better part of an hour, barely absorbing a word about triage protocols, running through and discarding about a dozen different ways to introduce myself again after 11 years, none of which sounded like anything other than a woman having a small crisis in business casual. He found me first, actually, out by the coffee station during the break, and for a second neither of us said anything at all. He just looked at me the way you look at something you're not sure is real, and I probably did the same right back at him. "You cut your hair," he said finally, which was such a strange, small, specific thing to say after 11 years that I laughed before I could stop myself, and something in his shoulders came loose like he'd been holding his breath, waiting to see if I'd still find him funny. We talked for the entire break and then quietly skipped the next session, which felt scandalous and also exactly like something we would have done at 23, standing in a stairwell instead of a hallway this time, catching each other up on a decade in the clumsy, overlapping way you do when there's too much and not enough time. He'd done his residency in trauma surgery, moved around more than he wanted to, gotten married at 29 and divorced at 32, no kids, an amicable enough split that he didn't flinch saying it out loud. I told him about nursing, about the ICU years, and the burnout that nearly pushed me out of the field entirely before I found my footing again in cardiac step-down. Neither of us mentioned the photograph. I hadn't brought it with me, hadn't planned any of this, and some instinct told me it wasn't the moment yet. He asked if I wanted to get dinner that Friday, not as a colleague thing. He made a point of saying, and I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence, which embarrassed me a little and seemed to please him a great deal. I brought the photograph to dinner, slid it across the table somewhere between the appetizer and the entree, and watched his whole face change when he recognized it, that same unguarded look from 11 years ago crossing his features in real time, except now I got to watch it happen instead of catching it by accident on film. "I always wondered what happened to you," he said, turning it over in his hands like it might tell him something new. "I looked you up once. Years ago. Didn't have the nerve to actually reach out. I told him I'd thought about doing the exact same thing more than once, and chickened out every time. Because what do you even say to somebody after that long? And what if the version of them you remembered didn't match the person who answered?" He looked up at me across the table, candlelight doing something unfair to his eyes, and said, "And now?" "Now I think maybe some things just take the long way around," I said, and I meant it more than I expected to when the words came out of my mouth. I won't pretend it's been simple since. We're both busy, both a little guarded from things that happened in the years between that hallway and that conference room, both aware that whatever this becomes has to survive real schedules and real disappointments, not just the easy nostalgia of one lucky photograph. Some nights I still wonder if we're trying to recreate something that only worked because we were young enough not to know better, chasing a feeling instead of a person. I don't have a tidy answer for that. Maybe you never really do, not until years down the line when you look back and can finally tell which kind of story you were in. But we've had 4 months now of actual dinners and actual phone calls and one very awkward, very sweet run-in with his mother, who apparently still has a photo of her own from that same era, one I never even knew existed, of the two of us at some hospital holiday party neither of us remembers agreeing to pose for. I keep the original photograph on my nightstand now, in a plain little frame I picked out myself, not because it's a good picture. The lighting's harsh, my bun's crooked, he's barely in focus. But because every time I look at it, I think about how close I came to throwing it away without a second glance, and how differently this whole year might have gone if I had. I think about all the photographs any of us have sitting in some drawer or box or old textbook right now, waiting for the day we finally clear it out. I wonder how many of them are holding on to someone we haven't finished with yet, whether we know it or not. And I wonder, honestly, if I'd have had the nerve to reach for mine the way I did, or if I'd have let it slide right back into the pile and told myself it wasn't worth the risk of finding out.